This conference will now be recorded.
So at any time, Chris or Todd, take it away.
Chris, who's starting it off?
I'll say good welcome, everyone. I'm happy to hand this meeting off to our chair, Todd.
Thank you, Chris.
Our new chair, Todd Jason. His
new
first
chair, Todd Jason.
on the job.
Yes, the honorary John Quinn position. Thank you for joining everybody this morning. It's good to see you. It's good to be serving in this capacity. I want to thank the department, the secretary, for giving me this opportunity. I've been a member of the committee for a number of years, and I'm very pleased to continue to work with you all. The first item, as I mentioned a minute ago, is the approval of the minutes. The minutes were sent around to everyone back in December. Has anybody seen it? Has anybody taken a look? Does anybody have any questions, concerns, or comments before I call for approval?
If I may, Todd, I just a moment. You're eager to dive right into the meeting minutes and some of our itinerary, but we do have a number of council members here, and it's just, I think it's fair to introduce some of our new council members, as well as a recognition of yourself as chair. It's also something to point out that the secretary had appointed Dr. Ben Hobbs as vice chair of the council. He will not be joining us today, as he's on a plane at the moment, coming back from Italy. I guess it's a nice sabbatical. Chris, did you want to do any other the additional?
Yeah. Thanks, Randy. Thanks. Yes, so we have a new year. We have some changes to the roster after our longtime chair retired. Thanks so much, Todd, for assuming chair responsibilities, and Dr. Hobbs, wherever he is over the Atlantic, for being vice chair. We also have a couple of new members to welcome. So filling the seat for utility, we have Ann Clace. Ann, do we have you this morning?
Hi, Chris. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Ann is coming to us from PEPCO, filling the seat for a public utility. Welcome, Ann. We're really happy to have you. And then we also are thanking Bob Wright for his years of service in our member, the general public spot, and transitioning to a new member in that spot, Ariel Warden. Ariel, do we have you this morning? There you are. Good morning and welcome to AQCAC. Ariel is coming to us from the University of Maryland Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health. Thank you so much, Ariel, for serving, as well as Bob for your 5 years on the council. Bob, do we have you today?
Yes, you do. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. So big round of applause for Bob. Thank you so much for your service on AQCAC and your continued service in state air quality policymaking on the Maryland Climate Commission's greenhouse gas mitigation working group.
Well, I'd like to say it's been a great experience. It's been 5 years. I've met a lot of new people, new council members, and new MDE staff, and I've been pleased with that experience. And I wish everyone the best of luck in this important work that you do for air quality in the state of Maryland.
Thank you so much. And so maybe I'll just do turning from membership to just a quick policy update before we get to the minutes, and maybe a look ahead to the year. The very end of last year, we finalized the state's plan to meet our climate goals, a 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2031 and achieving net zero across the entire economy by 2045. I'll direct everyone to read that plan when you get a chance. There are some regulatory actions in it, both to expect this year and in coming years. Two in particular that are sort of at the top of the to-do list in that plan for MDE that'll be coming through the council are zero emission equipment standards. These are standards for heating and water heating equipment. A number of states are considering these as an additional building decarbonization measure. So that's one thing we identify in the plan that we will be bringing to you all later this year. Another one is a clean heat standard, which is a policy that would drive decarbonization again in buildings via fuel suppliers investing in decarbonization measures, much like our current renewable portfolio standard works for electric utilities. So we'll be briefing you all over the course of the year as those policies come together, and expect that we will bringing proposals as soon as possible in the second half of the year for AQCAC to consider.
Chris, and if I may, I'd like to also just make one additional announcement of, well, one, just recommend that for the benefit of our council, new council members, that the council introduce themselves, but also just want to note internally at MDE that since our last meeting, Carolyn Jones is taking over as chief of the Regulation Development Division. So she's putting together much of the work and effort that goes toward the regulations and everything that's going towards these type of meetings moving forward. So a round of applause for Carolyn as well. We're very happy to see her in this role. And please, if the council, if they could introduce themselves for the new members, please.
Sania Amr, University of Maryland School of Medicine.
Randy, do you want to call a roll just so we know what order we're going in?
I'll defer to Kelsey, who has a better handle on that. I can look at the who's up on the screen right now.
Yes.
However,
Kelsey would be fine too.
Yeah, I am happy to help. Okay, so let's start out with Anna Marshall.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anna. I represent Baltimore Metropolitan Council, and I'm an environmental planner here working on air quality conformity and other related topics.
Nicole Cook.
Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm Nicole Cook. I'm the Agricultural and Environmental Faculty Legal Specialist with the University of Maryland Eastern Shore.
Megan Latchaw.
Hi, I'm Megan Latchaw, and I represent the Maryland Children's Environmental Health Protection Advisory Council. My day job is I'm on faculty at Johns Hopkins in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering.
Thank you. Ross.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ross Salowich. I fill the University of Maryland seat on the council. I'm on the faculty at UMD, and I'm an atmospheric chemist and climate scientist.
Thank you. Thomas Killeen.
Excuse me. Good morning. I represent the Maryland AFL-CIO. I'm a business representative for Sheet Metal Workers Local Union 100, and my background is testing, balancing, and commissioning of mechanical air handling systems.
Thank you. Weston Young.
Good morning. Happy New Year. Weston Young. I represent the Maryland Association of Counties. I'm a professional engineer and the Chief Administrative Officer for Worcester County.
Thank you. And Ariel.
You're on mute, Ariel.
No, we cannot hear you. It may be a technical flaw. Don't worry or panic, but you are muted.
Still no luck.
Yes, yeah, sorry. It appears as if you can speak, but we will have to talk to you in the future. Keep working at it though. Kelsey, did we mention Nicole, Ms. Cook? Yeah, you already.
Yes. But I see Larry's on. So Larry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Mr. Schoen, are you there? He is self-muted.
He did pop on the screen there for a second. Maybe he's also having technical difficulties. Okay, well, Anne, would you like to say something? Claes?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Sorry about that. No, I just wanted to say it's really great to be here, and I'm certainly excited about this appointment. I am certainly no John Quinn, but I look forward to working with all of you and meeting you in person. As stated, you know, I've worked in state government for 10 years in the Maryland Comptroller's Office, and I've been with Pepco Holdings for about a year and a half now. So again, really looking forward to working with all of you as the Maryland Chamber of Commerce representative as we work to help advise MDE on different air quality rules and regulations. So looking forward to seeing you guys.
Thank you. I think that's everyone else. I think that's everyone so far. If I missed you, please speak up, but I think everybody introduced themselves now.
Yeah, hi, this is Sunny Park.
Oh, perfect. Yes, I just saw your email. We're just going through some introductions, so if you just want to introduce yourself.
Okay, hi, I am representing American Institute of Chemical Engineers. Been a professional engineer working as a at the consulting company. And I am having trouble to log in currently, so I'm just joining as a phone call.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for that, and Kelsey for coordinating it. And now,
Great. Thanks. So, yep, thanks, Randy, Kelsey, and all members of the council. Good to see you all for the new year. So we have 2 action items on the agenda today. You can see them up on the screen here, but first we do need to finish the minutes. So I'll hand back to our chair, Todd Chasen, to run the rest of the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris, and I appreciate the tight leash that I'm on there. That's going to be necessary from now until the time that I'm finished. And good morning again to everyone. It really is a very impressive group of talent that the department has at its access within this council, and so it's a pleasure to be working with all of you. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the minutes? They were sent around via email by Kelsey back in December. Give everybody just a second. And for those of you who are having technical difficulties, let me assure you that that happens every single time that we have a meeting, just like every other meeting around the world, and you should not feel bad, and it'll happen to all of us eventually. Okay. Not hearing any comments about the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, I believe we've approved the minutes. Chris, I think it goes back to you for the briefings, yeah?
All right, so we have 2 action items. We'll start with some amendments to the landfill methane regulation that we've finalized last year, and then we'll turn to affirmative defense rule repeal. So do we have Eddie for the first action item?
Yes, I'm here. Can everybody hear me?
We hear you, Eddie.
Can. Eddie, just one quick thing before you get started. How are we going to take public comments if there are any? How should people sign up or indicate, Chris or Kelsey or Randy or someone?
So for the council's benefit, typically as we're presenting regulatory action items, the department will present the information. The council is welcome to interject during our presentations, ask questions as we go along. Once the department has finished its formal presentation process, the council reviews, deliberates, has a discussion, and it's at that point afterwards that the council is able to open it up and ask if there are any, if there's anybody in attendance that wishes to make a comment for the council before motions are put forth and your formal recommendation occurs. So it's a council process first, public involvement following that.
And Randy, if someone's, I'm sorry, if someone wants to speak, how can they sign up, or how can they indicate that? Members of the public, I mean.
Yeah, this is Carolyn Jones. Sorry, yeah, we do have the chat box open, so we'll be monitoring that. We can do that. And then otherwise, there is not raise your hand feature with this go-to meeting. So then we'll just open it up and let people speak. But we'll go ahead and monitor and see if anyone puts their comments or name in the chat box. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, Eddie, thank you very much. Thanks for your patience.
All right, Eddie, we're ready for you. We don't hear you if you're talking. Eddie, you're on mute.
I suggest that everybody who's not Eddie go on mute so that we don't have any background noise.
Carolyn, if we can't.
All right, I'm back. I'm sorry about that.
All right, there he is.
Yeah. Again, I apologize. I had some technical issues. For those who don't remember me, my name's Eddie Durant, and just a couple of months. I guess this is the first couple of slides. You can move on to the next slide, Carolyn. Okay, for those of you that aren't familiar, for those of you that aren't familiar with me, back in October 2022, I presented a regulation on municipal site landfill. Well, this regulation became effective June 12th of this year, and it has two components. One is the federal one, which incorporates EG and SPS, and the NESHAP for municipal solid waste landfills. And you go to the next slide, Carolyn.
And Eddie, I'll just say, just for the benefit of all, that it's a lot of acronyms thrown out there. We may need to help out at times with that. So emission guidelines, new source performance standards, that were some of the federal requirements that are incorporated into this regulation, as well as some the state taking some additional measures to control methane further from landfills.
Okay. And the next part would incorporate state requirements. And some of that we borrow from states that have similar regulations. One is Oregon, one is California. And these are specifically for methane emissions. If you look at, I kind of mentioned the last meeting that went from October, I did mention that the federal regulations were more geared towards non-methane organic compounds, but methane was a co-benefit. But more along the lines, Oregon and California's regulations are more geared towards methane reductions. So we kind of borrowed components from both the federal and the state regulations. MDE has and continues to engage in outreach. I want to spend a little bit of time on this because this is very important. Some of you may remember the Y2K thing, where we were told for months and months and months coming on that there was this computer glitch that was coming up and it would cause catastrophic effects as of January 1st, 2000. But when January 1st came, it really didn't. And part of that was because the public outreach raised awareness to such an extent that it minimized the issues related to that. And part of that, and with that thinking in line, this is why public outreach is so important to MDE and why we continue to engage in that. And we find it particularly beneficial to the sources itself. They're able to allocate resources and it better prepares them. We also had, we also work with landfills to address concerns. Some of these concerns were with record keeping, reporting. Some of them were related to emissions testing. And the two big takeaways I want you to take away from the last 2 points are that both the outreach and the working with the landfills to address their concerns. It kind of keeps the line of communications open. And also, we find that as you communicate with people, it results in fewer issues as far as, especially related to compliance. Okay, you can go to the next slide, Carolyn. Okay, I did mention previous stakeholder meetings that this regulation is a very comprehensive regulation. And this is probably one of our biggest regulations because it's over 20 pages long. Most of our regulations that we write, they're mainly along the lines of maybe at most 5 pages. So when you have that many pages and that big of a regulation, you're more than likely to introduce elements that arise. Some of them are human related. The reason that we're bringing this regulation before the council today is to correct some type of typographical and stylistic errors that were identified during the process, and it also clarifies certain standards. Again, we want to put our regulation, make sure it's aligned with some of the federal requirements, just for consistency. Okay, you can go to the next slide, Carolyn. Okay, one of the proposed amendments is to include a definition for controlled MSW landfills. If you look at our regulation now, you can see we do have a definition for an active landfills, active MSO landfills, and closed MSW landfills. All we're doing is adding the definition for controlled MSW landfills to remain consistent with the federal regulations and also with states that have similar regulations, as I kind of mentioned those before, which are Oregon and California. And all is just a Cliff Notes version. Controlled MSW landfills is any landfill in which a gas collection control system is required based on the regulation itself. We also had clarification of the timelines for the following: specific compliance actions based on the surface emission monitoring. All we did is we clarified the wording so that the process for installing a gas collection control system and complying with applicable requirements begins with the next quarter instead of what we originally had, which was the quarterly report submission. And this is for landfills that exceed the 200 ppmv methane concentration. We also clarified the timeline for design plans for MSW landfills. We changed it now where it is 1 year meeting certain criteria requirements to install and operate a gas flow control system instead of what it was. And the current regulation that you see now is 1 year following the effective date of the regulation or within 1 year of detecting any measured concentration of methane greater than 200 ppmv. We also changed, clarified the installation for new components and the landfill areas requiring to be controlled, and that's 60 days, and that's to make us more consistent with the federal regulation and again, states that have similar regulations. We also, based on comments we got from the comment period, we also made some clarification to the types of plant shutdown events that landfills with gas collection control systems need to report. And what we did is now we require 10-day notification for plant shutdowns that are the result of an emergency, catastrophic event, or landfill fire. Now, what we originally had it is that no matter what unplanned event you had reported, all other events as of now, they still have to be reported, but they can be included in a semi-annual or annual reporting. Now, one thing I didn't mention is we did do some modifications to the temperature, and that was, we revised that based on comments from the stakeholders, and that also was to make us more consistent with the federal regulations and some of the state requirements. So that's all I have for you. It's a very, very short presentation, and we can take questions now.
Do any of the council members have questions or comments?
This is Ross. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning,
Yes.
Ross.
Okay, so Eddie, we've known each other for a long time. I'm sorry to be so cantankerous in the new year. And I know that what you're presenting is based on California and Oregon, but you know, the 200 ppm, that's a huge amount of methane. And we know that landfills leak like sieves in California, the research of Paul Wenberg's group. We know that in Maryland, the landfills that ostensibly are in compliance because they go out with these small handheld monitors and they say it's not 200, leak like sieves. And that is published in the peer-reviewed literature by the group of Russ Dickerson at University of Maryland, Shinrong Ran. I'm co-author on the papers. This is very weak. And I know that it's based on the federal regs, and I know it's based on Oregon, and I know it's based on California, but this is not state of the art. It's state of many, many decades ago. So, you know, I don't know what to say about moving this forward. Well, actually, I have a lot to say. We should get state-of-the-art equipment in the sites and try to figure out where it's leaking and why it's leaking. This isn't going to fix the problem, in my opinion. So I'm eager to hear your response.
At first, Ross, I just would like to point out that the 200 ppm was part of the regulation that has been adopted and is already on the books. It is not something that is being added or changed for this particular regulation. So, in all fairness, it is not part of the regulatory review or something that we're changing or adopting at this point.
Right, but, well, okay, fair enough, but, and maybe this will be approved for that reason, but I just think this is a feel-good measure that's gonna not move us forward in meeting President Biden's methane pledge.
Randy, Eddie, Carolyn, for the benefit of the council, could you remind everyone what role the 200 threshold plays in the regulation?
This is the 200 ppmv is what we have is emissions testing, which is if landfills, I did mention something about the criteria requirements. That means landfills that meet a certain waste in place, a certain methane generation rate, they have elected the choice under regulation 04 is they can either install a gas flush control system or they can do surface emission testing. And that threshold for the surface emission testing is 200 ppmv or greater. And if a landfill were to doing this it's on a quarterly basis. If they were to test greater than the 200 ppmv, they would have to install a gas flush control system. So that's where that 200 ppmv comes from. And as Randy mentioned, it was underneath the previous regulation that's currently on the books.
And so this is when a landfill operator is doing a survey, if they find any readings that are 200
yes.
Or greater, then that triggers the additional requirements because it indicates that there's an unacceptable leak.
Yes.
So that's not necessarily the standard to meet. That's a leak indicator. That's meant to be sort of a very high level that's caught during a mission survey. Sorry, Carolyn.
What I wanted to mention was that number is lower than any of the EPA requirements at this time. EPA is at 500. And so that is one of the more stringent standards that we have introduced with the 200. If and when a gas collection system is in and designed, it does change to 500 ppm for detection when the gas collection system is installed, because there's various site conditions with the wells and other things on the property. So it's 200 for if it's closed and capped, and it's 500 for the active collection systems. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that California is having some workshops right now to investigate the 200 ppmv for universal, to reduce that for the landfills that are required to have the gas collection systems in and that meet the federal standards. So they are having those discussions, and we're following some of the research and information that's being presented there. So it would be a next steps. This is just to make sure that the regs that we have proposed that were effective in June and that the landfills are meeting, that they get these 1 or 2 clarifications so that we match up with the EPA and we can turn it into a state plan, which is approved by EPA.
So Carol and Chris, you know, this precedes both of you being in your current roles, but this is not a new issue for Maryland. I mean, we've known way before the pandemic about the prodigious amounts of methane coming out of Brown Station in Prince George's County, for instance, and yet we've never got permission to get the state-of-the-art equipment on site and try to figure out where the methane is coming from. And so I guess my frustration is that we've had for many years an opportunity to lead and not follow California. And again, we're just following California. So I guess that's just the way it is. And while I have the mic, I am curious if anyone knows, it used to be that at Brown Station, the methane was collected and was transported to, I believe, a correctional facility where it was burned to generate electricity or heat. I'm not sure which, but now it's just being flared. Does anybody know why the collection, I'm asked all the time and I don't know why the collection of methane has stopped at Brown Station and is now being flared?
The Brown Station question we can get with our compliance department, but I don't have the answer offhand.
Thanks.
You can ask the county.
Ross,
Sounds
anything
like-
else?
What was that?
I was just asking whether you had anything else before I asked whether anybody else had questions.
I think that's enough. Thanks, Chris.
So just kind of going off what Ross said, it sounds like today there's maybe, I don't know if we're going to vote on this, but there's a question before us today, but it also sounds like maybe there's some opportunities for further discussion about how we can be even more proactive. I really like James's comment in the chat about even talking about diversion of organic waste. So maybe there's opportunity to talk beyond today about landfill and methane.
Certainly, we can follow up with the council. And one for some context, something that went through a different part of MDE, so didn't go through AQCAC, was the food residuals diversion regulation, implementing a law passed in 2021, where our land program issued regulations requiring large generators of food residuals to divert that to composting and other reuse activities. So that's sort of jurisdictionally, that was a land regulation rather than air regulation. But that was finalized and in effect shortly before this methane air regulation. So I believe it was December 2022 that land regulation was finalized. So why don't we identify as a follow-up both monitoring the California process as they're considering this exact number 200, as well as prepare an update for AQCAC on the implementation of the food residuals diversion regulation and law. And why don't we get back and find out what the timeline is on that California process before we sort of say which of the upcoming meetings will provide that briefing to AQCAC, but identify that we will provide an updated briefing for AQCAC on those 2 dual topics at whichever meeting later this year makes sense.
And Chris, if I may, just for the sake of the organics diversion, it was a topic that came up very prominently in our stakeholder process as we were developing the original municipal solid waste landfill regulations. We had talked pretty extensively during our stakeholder process on that issue. We had land management come and present to stakeholders on all of the different efforts that states, counties, the department are taking in that matter. It's a major part of the technical support document that the department developed for this regulation as it went forward back in October. But as you mentioned, this is an ongoing, evolving field. There is certainly updates that can be provided, but we did put out some extensive information on that and recognize it as a necessary, important part of methane diversion with landfills.
Also, just to flag for future discussion, I think Ross's question about the flaring versus using the methane, I think is important too.
Okay, thanks. So we have those 3 follow-up items for a briefing for the council.
That makes sense. Other council members with questions or comments? We do also have the chat, which has a few postings in there that we'll get to in a minute. Okay, last call for the council members. You'll have an opportunity to talk again after we hear any public comments and before we take a vote. So this isn't your last opportunity. Anybody else on the council? Okay, let's go to the public comments. And I see that there are a couple people who have posted in there. But if you can come on and identify who you are and who you're with and make your point as succinctly as possible, but comprehensively as well, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Leah Kelly, and I'm an attorney with the Environmental Integrity Project. We were involved in submitting a lot of technical comments during the original rulemaking. I have a couple of points. One, as I noted in the chat, the definition of controlled MSW landfill is confusing because it references a measured methane generation rate, but the methane generation rate is only calculated, it's not measured. What is measured is the concentration. So I just think that needs to be clarified, and Carolyn already responded to that. On the subject of kind of being more proactive and going beyond what's been done in Oregon and California, I just want to flag for folks that EPA has approved as an alternative method for conducting surface monitoring a drone-based method. It's called OTM 51, and that's an approved EPA compliance method for surface methane monitoring. I think just consider that. I'm not asking for any rulemaking, but it's something to look at and consider in Maryland. I think the operators might be interested in it because it avoids having to have a human being do that initial walk along the landfill surface. For organics diversion, I just want to flag that we have submitted a petition for rulemaking to the EPA asking them to dramatically improve their national standards. And one of the things that we have asked them to do is to approve organics diversion as an alternative compliance methodology, which will take some figuring out on their part. But I think that that's an important aspect of controlling landfill methane. I wanted to flag the importance of submitting this rule to EPA soon to make it federally enforceable as soon as possible, and just I was wondering what the next steps are in terms of process in doing that. And then the last thing is that I flagged in the chat that there's a temperature threshold change for looking at whether there are subsurface temperatures in the landfill. You're proposing to change it from 131 to 145. And I understand that 145 isn't the federal rules, but the state does have the authority to issue more protective standards than EPA. So I'm just wondering what other considerations went into that proposed decision. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Chris, do you want to respond to those, or do you want to take the rest of the comments and then respond to everything at once?
I think there were a good number there, so I think let's take these ones and then turn to the others.
Okay.
So from the team, I heard it sounds like the definition issue, perhaps we've answered in the chat. And thank you for the info on EPA's drone-based method approval and the petition to EPA for organics diversion. From the team, do we have answers on what to expect in terms of getting the reg to EPA?
So that process, I'll speak on that one first, just in the sense that when we submit a plan to EPA, whether it be a state implementation plan, or in this case, it's a non-criteria pollutant 111D state plan that we submit to EPA, we need to be certain that we've got the regulation in its best form. It's not something that, once we get to the process of submitting something to EPA, it's not something we can easily withdraw and start again. So, we're working through this. We realized during the development process, this was a very long regulation, nearly 20 pages long, as you all recall, reviewing the first one. And we knew that there were a number of issues that were still outstanding with stakeholders, and we were working through with clarifying that. As you can see, we're working through that process just right now. We're going to be taking these comments and everything that we're hearing during this process, and as we start the formal adoption process following, let's just say the council approves that we move forward, we do have a public hearing process. Barring that we do not have anything that is a substantial process that holds us up and makes us need to reconsider and make additional amendments, at that stage we will be proceeding with packaging up a formal EPA submittal. So that would probably be towards the end of the summer or early fall that we would be proceeding with a submission to EPA if all goes accordingly. Carolyn, does that sound fair? Anything you want to add to that?
Yep, that's the schedule, yes. I can add one thing about the drone method for the landfills that was brought up and that has been approved by EPA. We're also aware of it, and it is an alternative compliance option for landfills. So perhaps some of them will take that technology on with the current plans that we have for the detections. So we're still waiting to receive those final plans, but that is an acceptable option with our reg.
Correct, and rather than writing it in as a specific line item into the regulation as an approvable measuring plan, it is part of the alternative compliance option for doing those measurements.
Thanks, team. And on the temperature point, do we have any context for that?
Well, the change is proposed because the higher temperature has been approved and being used in the NESHAP, which is the beyond NSPS, which is the new sources and for existing, and it links up with hazardous and any other emission releases. So that temperature change was approved. The higher temperature was already in our regulation in 3 other sections, and this one section we wanted to change it to match up so that it was consistent. Again, with what the other states, which is only California, Oregon, and Washington, they're the only other states in the US that have this rule, and we're matching them and the EPA. So that it was more, that's really a clarification matchup.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. Todd, I think we can move to any others now.
Yeah, other members of the public, I see that within the chat, and I just want to make sure that we're referencing what we're talking about in the chat, because it's possible that for technical reasons or because someone's on the phone, they can't see it. Mr. James Wagner had asked a question, but has believes it has been addressed by the discussion. I see a comment from Scott Thompson. I don't know if Scott, if you want to come on and ask your question, or if somebody wants to read the question and respond.
Sure. So Scott's from MDE team here answering the question about Brown Station, and there's a leaky pipeline in between the landfill and the correctional facility, so that's the reason the gas is not being used at the facility pending repair of that pipeline.
And I see a thumbs up from Ross, and so thank you, Scott, for that. Other questions or comments from the public? Mark Hunsick, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, has a question. Do you want to come on, or do you want us to read it? And can MDE see that question, frame it up, and then answer it?
Okay, yes, this is Carolyn. I'm just seeing the question. Let me.
Yep, take a second. It did just pop up. And just to make, while you're looking at that, Larry, I saw that you came on screen. I wanted to make sure that you weren't coming on screen with your headset because you wanted to ask a question or comment. It was just that you'd gotten your act together this morning. You're good. Okay, Caroline, back to you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think this question is relating to what we've been speaking of a little. EPA has guidance for landfills. They have requirements for new landfills, but they delegate the responsibility to the states for existing landfills. And that's where our reg has been set to meet those EPA requirements, be more stringent. But then we also have to submit this grouped up paperwork of the regulation as a state plan to EPA. That's just the name of the 111D is called the state plan. So that process that Leah Kelly also mentioned needs to happen. And so what Randy was explaining about process, once we get these amendments to the reg done, then we submit it to EPA. And then they also do an announcement in the Federal Register saying that they are approving or disapproving our link up. But regardless, our regulation is in place. It's state enforced, but it's a question of whether there's federal rules versus state rules. And it's helpful to have it in our plan with EPA, but it's also helpful for the facilities so that they don't have to follow two sets of standards. I hope that answers that.
Excellent, thank you.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. This is Mark. I did ask that question. I guess what I wanted clarification on, sorry to just jump in.
No, you're good.
Is that as of today, at least, if not since the MDE rule came into effect, there are actually two sets of rules that every landfill in Maryland has to abide by at this time, and that is the EPA federal rule, the subpart 000, as well as the MDE rule. Is that correct? That is, we're dealing with EPA on one set of rules, but also dealing with MDE on another set, and they are occurring simultaneously.
Yeah, yes, that's true until EPA approves our state regs as the federal plan. However, there should be a lot of matchups so that our reg follows the EPA, but also is more stringent. So if you are following COMAR 261142, you will meet the standards of the subpart 000.
Right, but there is a requirement to report to EPA directly under 000 separately from reporting to MDE, since you don't have delegation, correct?
I'll have to confirm with our compliance department, but I would say that is correct.
For now, that is most likely the process until the Maryland state plan is approved and in place. And as Carolyn mentioned, we had option of developing like two separate rules. One was just a Maryland regulation that incorporates all of the federal process, and then a Maryland rule that could have gone beyond for our methane control and some other things, but it just seemed to make more sense just to have one regulation and try to tie in those two measurements together. So it does get very confusing and complicated in the sense, you know, truly only the operators and our compliance and ourselves maybe fully understand it to some respect. But it's just one of those very, very cumbersome, long, challenging regulations, but it is incorporating both Maryland state standards and federal as best we can, lining up with federal requirements. And
Thanks,
once
Randy.
it is formally submitted, adopted, approved by EPA, then it kind of streamlines the process. A source would not be subject to having to abide by two separate reporting schemes and approval processes and everything.
Okay, other members of the public before we turn back to the council? Okay, members of the council, based on the questions that you've heard, the back and forth, do you have anything else before we move to a motion? Would anybody like to make a motion?
I do. I
Yes,
move
please.
accept.
Sorry, I couldn't see who that was, but please go ahead.
This is Sunny.
Yes, please, go ahead.
I move to accept.
Excellent. Do I have a second?
This is Sunny Park. Second.
I have a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of approving the regulations as drafted, say aye.
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 Aye. Is there anyone opposed?
I'm gonna vote no on this one. Thanks.
Okay. We have Ross voting in the no. Anybody else voting no? Is anyone abstaining?
Yes, I'll
Larry
abstain,
is
Larry.
indicating that he is abstaining. And I believe, I'm assuming that if we have a quorum and that we only have one abstention and one opposition, that we've just approved the motion. And of course, we have 3 or 4 action items that will be coming up in the future meetings that Chris has been taking notes on. So we don't need a motion on that, but that will be part of the minutes indicating what we'll be following up on. And I believe that takes care of our first agenda item, and that we are on time to move on to our second.
Excellent, thanks so much. So our second item, you'll see on the agenda, is repeal of the affirmative defense rule. Do we have Sana on the line?
We do. Hi, Chris. Hi,
Welcome,
everyone. Good
Sana.
morning.
You all may recall Sana, a frequent participant in these meetings, manager of our permits program.
Right. Yeah. So usually I participated as a permit engineer or division chief. In 2019, Karen Irons, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but in late 2019, Karen Irons retired. And so I'm now the program manager. Been working in the program my entire career, so 28 years now. But yeah, so I hope this is a fairly straightforward regulation change request. Just let me know if you have any questions. It's pretty, there's not a lot to it, but, and I thank the Reg Development Group for helping me move through this, because this is required by EPA in order for us to move forward with our Title V program. So if you could go to the next slide. Okay, so just real quick, here's a background. So Title V of the Clean Air Act requires major sources of air pollutants to obtain and operate in compliance with an operating permit. And most of you are probably familiar that the state of Maryland has the authority to issue these federal operating permits to major sources in the state for EPA. And in those regulations, in order to have our program approved, in order for us to have the authority to issue Title V permits for EPA, we had to incorporate a lot of those Title V regulations and requirements into our Code of Maryland regulations. And we've had this operating permit approved since 1996. And in those requirements, there was an affirmative defense provision, and it allowed sources of air pollution to assert in certain enforcement cases that if they had noncompliance with emission limitations, if they could demonstrate that they had qualifying emergency circumstances, that they might have a defense or a way to not be held accountable for those, I guess, enforcement cases or noncompliance. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so the reason why this affirmative defense rule now has to be removed, and it's currently in our Code of Maryland Regulations, Chapter 3, I guess we'd call it Section 24, is that they're inconsistent with EPA's interpretation of the enforcement structure. And there was a circuit court case, I believe, let me see if I can get the exact. Yeah, so in 2014, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit vacated the affirmative defense provision. So since that decision, EPA has been proposing rules to remove those defense provisions from their Title V federal regulations. It had some ongoing concerns from sources, et cetera. And so finally, in March 28, 2022, EPA reproposed to remove the affirmative defense provisions from their regulations. And on July 12th, they finalized the removal of those provisions. And they set up guidelines for the states to come into compliance with their now change that's been approved in their regulations. So some states actually include affirmative defense provisions in each permit. And so those states are required to go back out and try to reissue those permits and without that information in them because it's no longer a valid regulation. Fortunately for Maryland, we did not have those provisions in each individual permit that we issue. We only had it in our Code of Maryland Regulations in Chapter 3. And so what we're proposing is to really just remove 0324 from our regulation that allows for affirmative defense to be consistent with EPA's change. And we have to do it within a year of when EPA finalized it, which was, I believe, I think I said July 12th. So by this summer, which is why we're coming forward with it now, in order to get it removed from our regulations on time, we're proposing it now to be removed, and that would meet EPA's requirement to remove it within the year. And that's it. I think the next slide is just asking for questions.
And so just to be crystal clear about this, we don't really have any choice on this matter, right?
Not really, no. So yeah, we would be, and they would basically say they could tell us that our operating permit program is no longer approved because we didn't remove the affirmative defense provisions from our regulation. We have to be consistent with the federal operating permit program in order to have the authority to issue these permits.
And we wouldn't want that to happen. Council members, this one seems like it's pretty straightforward and non-controversial. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Are there any members of the public who would like to comment? I saw most everyone dropped off and ran about their days as soon as the first item was done, so there may not even be any members of the public left. But if anybody's out there and wants to comment on this, please let us know. And I also, there's a question from Mr. Hunsick. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Does this only affect Title V sources?
Yeah, so this affects only those sources that are subject to Title V regulations under the Clean Air Act. So if there are state provisions in state permits, but yes, it only affects Title V sources and the applicable requirements in the Title V permit.
Good clarification, thank you. Anybody else in the public have any questions or comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
I
Seconded.
I have a motion and a second. Any further conversation? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
abstaining? I believe it passed with no votes against or abstaining, and I believe that item is now done.
Thanks very much to the council. Those were our 2 action items for today. So Mr. Chair, I leave to you if you're prepared to adjourn.
And our next meeting is when?
Kelsey, could you bring up the agenda? So at the bottom of the agenda, you see the next meeting dates. We do, for the council's benefit, schedule quarterly meetings and try to keep to them as best as possible. I haven't discussed this with our director, Mr. Hoagland, but March 11th is looking a little ambitious at this moment. Whether we do have any regulatory items to bring before the council at that time is questionable. It may be a briefing or something of that along those lines. But if you could just at least place a hold on your calendars for these potential dates for our next meetings. There we go.
Excellent. Thank you for that. There being no other business, I see that Larry has moved that we adjourn, and I accept that, and we are done. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you soon.
Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.